Hello everyone, and today it is time for me to rank the Big Brother 2 cast as game players based on certain tiers, just like I've done for all the BB Can seasons and even the Total Drama seasons. Unlike the BB Can seasons, I'm adding another layer to the rankings, especially with the early seasons, where I am basing it on whether the game that they displayed here is easily replayable in more modern seasons and if it aged well to thrive in modern seasons. So I have to take that into consideration as well, since there are many gameplay elements that change from this season towards the seasons after it, and I have to put that in account. Once again, I'm going to be basing it off the 7 tiers that I've discussed earlier. It's going to be based partially on placement, whether they had agency or not, whether they were screwed over, whether they made it far due to things that they did or things outside of their control, whether they were good at competitions, whether they were good strategically, whether they were good socially, so on and so forth. Abysmal is the worst of the worst, and they have essentially no really redeemable qualities as a game player, and will probably do horribly every chance they get, based off of what they showed in this season. So in 12th place is Justin. Not going to waste much time on this one. He made a bad first impression on some people and ended up on the Chilton side of the house, who are all hated for their vile, tasteless, tacky, and other behaviors that the house found to be unacceptable. He had to be told to not sexually assault or physically threaten people and vandalize the house several times. Clearly, he should not have been let through the casting process, essentially and especially since his criminal record was known beforehand, so it's not shocking that the actions which caused him to be a criminal would be displayed in the house. He was socially very poor, since he was arguing with many people in the house, some of them being his supposed close allies like Kent, made all of them feel uncomfortable, and while they kind of blamed his behavior on Chilltown, it was all on his own actions, and he put himself in a position where he would have been a target had he not been pulled, and then of course he gets himself pulled before the first eviction even happens. Nothing else to say. At 11th place, and the final person in this tier is Autumn. It was clear from the beginning that Big Brother was just not suited for her. During the season, she's a very nice, welcoming, and warm person, but it's also clear that she's a very insecure, needy, hurt person, that there's a lot of sadness and trauma within, and it didn't result in a good social game, despite all the qualities that I listed about her earlier that were positive. Being on Big Brother and the freshness of this new format was never going to bode well for her, and now that I'm thinking about it, I don't remember there ever being a sense of strategy with her, or her even mentioning any strategy in the diary room, or any of the conversations that were happening. She was a part of the Cheryl blindside, but she wasn't a key figure in it, and while she was in the majority, they all quickly turned on her because they knew how quickly the game was picking up and felt like she was not strong enough to write it out, not only just for the team, but for herself. I will say that she was not the target for many people going into the second HOH, so that is a plus for her, and she was able to get into a majority. But when people perceive you so poorly, to the point that you're getting sent home for the best of your mental health, and for no real strategic reasoning whatsoever, it's clear that there's a huge issue. I don't see her doing well in a more modernized, updated version of Big Brother either, like the more recent seasons, since it's a lot more cutthroat, a lot more game focused, and people have less sympathy just in general. The bad tier are for people who aren't good players at all, have a lot of flaws as game players, and would most likely not do well on most seasons. But they are not the worst of the worst, and they might have one or two somewhat redeemable qualities. At 10th is Shannon. She's someone that is somewhat of a question mark, though it's very obvious that she's a bad player in the season. She had the quote unquote I'm not like other girls attitude, which isolated her from the women on the jump, and she became close with the guys, though there were moments where she got along with Nicole and Krista somewhat, while being decent enough with Monica. People saw her as very competitive and willing to do anything to win, but we really didn't see that based off her actions in the house. While she was nominated for eviction, she was not the initial target, but intentionally did things so she could go home. So if she was so cutthroat, she would have just let Will go home. Either way, this and what I mentioned earlier is a perception issue, and a lot of people play poorly due to having an inaccurate and poor perception. Mike and Will were her allies in the season, though Justin was seemingly with them, and they brought the absolute worst in one another. They had this arrogant, vile, toxic air about them that caused the house to not only want to target them, but to not want anything to do with them. After the blind side, Shannon, as well as the others in Chilltown, tried to make amends and reintegrate themselves, but everyone called her phony, inauthentic, and didn't allow her to really reintegrate herself into the social dynamics. I do wonder how things would have been and what she could do if she didn't essentially quit for well, since she was good in competitions, and she might not have been seen as much of a threat without Will. The final person in this tier at 9th is Mike, and yet again, this is based off the skills and potential he showed in this season and this season only. And I'm basing it solely on whether his Big Brother 2 game, skills, and strategy from this season is transferable or not, and whether the game he played will age better, if not more, in recent seasons. The thing about Mike that caused me to put him higher than Shannon is that people actually liked him for a bit. His good first impressions on the house guest was why he ended up winning the first HOH. People saw him as a fun presence in the house, and even when he was evicted, they admitted that they missed his fun presence and energy. Unfortunately for him, he did not let that do the work for him, and his attitude quickly turned negative and toxic, especially with the 3 people he aligned in with, in Will, Shannon, and Justin. An arrogant side to him came out, and it played a part in his poor strategy of using Cheryl as a pawn against Nicole, and making that very transparent to the house, where they are able to contracept that, or intercept it. He did not see the blind side coming, where even his allies had some sort of inclination that it was most likely happening, and then he tried humbling himself to reintegrate back into the house, which never worked. Luckily for him, he built a solid enough relationship which turned into a showman with Krista, which kept them all safe the next week, and Top wanted Will and Shannon nominated during Krista's HOH, not Mike. Hardy offered him a life bone in offering him safety when he was HOH, so Mike could have his own agency outside of his alliance, but he outright rejects it. Mike didn't even lie to Hardy and claim yes, which is one of the 2 optimal moves, or actually takes the deal, which is the other optimal move. And of course, when he does get nominated by Kent, he tries to guilt trip Kent and acted a whole ass during his final week, while also giving up and not letting Will campaign for him to stay. Like I said before in other videos, the potential tier are for people who I feel were either somewhat screwed over, they didn't really do much wrong, but they aren't good players, bad players, or mediocre players. So they're kind of just in this unknown, essentially. At 8th place is Cheryl. There really isn't much to say about Cheryl in general. She was very well liked, and based on how the first HOH competition is set up, where it's about first impressions, this was immediate. She continued to be well liked, and because of this, Mike Bookie decided to use her as a strategic nominee, hoping that it would essentially make him a one-man jury to send home the other nominee in Nicole. Where Cheryl went wrong is that she cannot do her due diligence regarding threat management, where people like Bunky and Kent immediately picked up on the fact that she is the bigger threat. Justin saw her as phony, and it made it easier to vote her out. I don't really know how Cheryl would do if she were on other seasons, which makes her an even bigger question mark. With BB3 being a similar format, I think she would have been fine, but in more modernized seasons, even like a BB4 or BB5, I don't know if she would be able to adapt to being more strategic, and in more recent eras, we have seen middle-aged women and mothers in general struggle in the Big Brother house. So while I do think she has potential based on what she showed in this season, and she didn't do much that caused her to be sent home, I don't think her game would fare well in other, especially more recent seasons. So the mediocre tier are for people who aren't good players and aren't bad players, but I don't feel like they have any additional potential based on what they showed here. So they essentially have a mix of good and bad traits. Ironically, at 7th place is Kent. I think people generally forget that Kent was the first main one heavily gaming in the season, as he tried to start a guys alliance, which included Justin, Bunky, and then we heard rumblings that he wanted to add Will, Bunky, and Hardy. It is clear that he really wanted this to happen, and we saw how him and Justin immediately promised to never take out one another, though this turned around in the opposite direction very quickly, so we see that Kent has a strategic mindset. I don't know how true this was, but apparently he used the swing vote to keep Nicole in the game over Cheryl, and it was why Chilltown, especially Mike, had an axe to grind with him. When he is HOH, we do see him make a deal with Will, where he would not nominate the latter if the latter in Will didn't nominate him if he won HOH, and apparently he tried to make some alliances here, which got back to Nicole and it pissed her off. At the same time, he cannot adapt to the quick pace of the season strategically, as he thought Top was a stronger alliance than it was at a certain point in the season, where everyone else had moved on. While he had some good strategic ideas, it rarely went through, and that was because of his poor social game. His guys' alliance never panned out because he ended up conflicting with Mike and Justin very quickly. When Top happened, there was some people like Nicole, Hardy, Monica, and Bunky who gravitated towards him and saw him as a genuine father figure, and it caused for most of them to turn on him eventually just because it took a downturn after a few weeks of just dealing with his general personality. He mentioned several times that he was not quote-unquote phony and found it hard to fit in with the fame whores who are a lot younger than him. And while some of that's true, I also think he used that as a deflection tactic of his strategy not working out in his favor. Overall, he has solid strategic skills and was able to read people's intentions before some others did, like knowing that Krista and Hardy are full of crap long before the others did. But his social skills were relatively poor, and it did affect his ability to strategically move forward in the game. And I don't see that he would really adapt to the way it was in later seasons and how fast-paced the more modern seasons are, in addition to the age discrepancies. If he makes it a decent length in a season, it's because they see him as a GOAT, but I don't see him ever winning a season. At 6th place is Bunky. He is someone who has a lot of empathy to give to people and is able to bring empathy towards other people, which definitely helped him bond with people. He was a very passive, shy guy who was seen as weaker and struggled with being himself since there was a lot of homophobia happening in the earlier portion of the season. But he eventually came out of his shell, became a part of the majority alliance in Top, and kinda just stayed out of the fray. But while he was well liked for the most part, things did start to turn around against him around the time Kent was going home, and how he was getting very bitter, gaining an attitude, and isolating himself. While he didn't become villainous like Hardy and Nicole, I don't think Bunky ever really recovered from it, and I don't know if his social game was enough for him to be seen as a jury threat, since a lot of them just didn't respect him. From what we got with Bunky, his strategy was mainly to kiss butts to the people who were in power, but he didn't float. And we saw this especially with Nicole and Hardy once they started their HOH streak. And he also someone who felt very comfortable in the Top alliance. Too comfortable, in my opinion. At the same time, he is very passive with regards to strategy and was not able to use his social skills to manipulate or influence. I think when he realized that he didn't have much power, he got very bitter against people, especially about Hardy, and it was not a good look, even if he had good reads and observations at times. Bunky is an okay player, and his social skills will cause people to feel comfortable enough with him staying around. But I can see scenarios where he just does not get in a big early alliance and can never infiltrate it, where he would have been booted earlier, and he was strategically too passive, which only becomes more of an issue in more modern seasons. I also think he gets very tunnel visioned, which we definitely saw during his later weeks in the season, and that's not a good trait to have. The final person in this tier at 5th is Monica. She is an interesting person to talk about, since Monica is a more passive person strategically than most, but we see that she became a threat to win at the end and was arguably the most observant person in the house, and was such from the very beginning. What benefits Monica is that she has a huge gift for empathy, where she is very supportive of others, is great at listening and making people feel seen and heard. Monica mentioned that she had to tone down her personality so she can fly under the radar and not be a huge target, which definitely worked since a lot of people got evicted earlier. At the same time, she also did this because she's aware of the perception of black people who are very loud and opinionated, which has affected many house guests' games in a negative way that came after Monica. Strategically, there really isn't much to discuss. She stayed out of the way and went under the radar for most of the season, but it helped push the narrative that she was doing nothing. She still voted out Nicole when everyone else in her alliance voted out Cheryl, especially when the votes were very close, and she definitely had some sort of tunnel vision vendetta with Nicole for the entire season. Monica was a part of the Untouchable Alliance with Krista and Hardy when they were supposed to sit back from the drama and go to the end with one another, but that faded because she and Hardy did not have a very close relationship with one another, and we learned that she and Krista blamed Nicole and her relationship with Hardy for ending the Untouchables. After that and the top alliance ending, she got close in allegiance with Bunky, who immediately went home next. She won HOH, which split up the power duo, and then she was on her own again, where she was booted. Like Bunky, I can see a few scenarios of her making it far on more modern seasons, due to her social skills and not being seen as threatening, but I could also just see her staying on the outs if she doesn't get in that majority alliance, and she would be one of the older house guests on more modern seasons. I think she is a bit more observant than Bunky is, and she was a bigger threat to win, though that might have been due to outside circumstances. In general, she's just okay, and I don't have a whole lot of faith in her to really improve if she were on other seasons, especially since she has her standards and refuses to do certain things to advance herself in the game. The solid tier are for people who have more good traits than bad traits, but they're not a top player in their season or even just a top player in general, and they're above average essentially. The only person in this tier at 4th place is Krista. I was pleasantly surprised with her as a game player after rewatching the season. I knew that she had some potential, but I forgot how good of a player she was. Of course, since she was the small town country girl, and she had sex appeal, people did like her and found her to be charming, which she definitely played up to her advantage. It came to the point where there were a few people, mainly Nicole and Hardy, who mentioned that they would throw their games for her, and apparently Will agreed to this with them as well. Everybody liked her in the beginning, and she was the only one who had Showtown and Top in her good graces, and balanced it finally. Kent was the only one who saw through her, and she was more cunning that she let on, which is what he saw through. But things started falling apart for her, where many mentioned that they were worried about what would happen to her if she won. She cursed like a sailor, contradicting her image, and she was starting to go downhill socially, since she told all of them the business of others, which people knew. But her eviction was the most emotional one this season. I also forgot to mention that she kept telling people in the final week that it's on, which disturbed people to say the least. Strategically, I found her to be pretty solid as well. Like I mentioned earlier, she was the only house guest to be on both Top and Showtown's good graces, where she was obviously in Top, and Showtown thought that she was in their alliance with them. With her winning HOH, it could have ruined her position and exposed her to both sides, but she nominated Autumn and Kent, two people at the bottom of Top, and no one cared about those nominations, so she got no backlash, and Showtown remained to be a target. She was in the Untouchables alliance with Monica and Hardy, who are also in the Top alliance, and that put her in a good position. And then the likes of Nicole, Will, and Bunky were people she had good relationships with as well. The thing with Krista is that she started to get sloppy. People started seeing that she was reporting information to other people, and Kent was the first person to see this, but he had no power at the time to do anything about it, and her biggest mistake was selling Hardy out about the Untouchables and getting Will to target him. To Will, who told Nicole, who told Hardy, and then they both decided to turn on Krista. She was learning the game as she goes, has the social game and saw strategic skills, and was pretty good in comps from what I remember, which I think would cause her to do well in more seasons and in more modern seasons compared to this, though she had this thing where she would shame people for voting out their friends, so there's kind of a sense of hypocrisy there. So the second last and the second highest tier is the good tier, and these are the people who have a lot more positive than negative traits as a game player and would do well on most seasons, but they're missing something that causes for their game here to be in the best of the best. This one is going to be controversial, especially because they won and because of the reputation of this person, but I'll explain it all as to why I have Will as third. Will put himself in such a poor position in the beginning of the season, where he aligned with some unlikable people and they all brought out the absolute worst in one another, but he was seen as the leader and the figurehead of it compared to the others. The Top Alliance wanted to target him specifically for the first few weeks, and when Hardy nominated him with Shannon, which they tried to get Krista to do last week, if it wasn't for Shannon self-sabotaging so she could be voted out, where he also mentions that he wants to leave as well, there's a very good chance that he leaves here. Will didn't even care to speak to a majority of the cast and was annoyed that one of the early HOH competitions was about the facts of the other house guests, since he did not speak to them and he complained about it. Despite that, there was an almost immediate shift after Shannon left, which the other house guests noticed. He became a lot quieter, a lot less obnoxious, started taking the time to get to know the other house guests, started slowly aligning himself with Nicole and Hardy, and being a listening ear to people. It was here where he was able to plant seeds that caused the destruction of Krista's relationships with Hardy and Nicole, but it didn't happen in the way he planned it, as he wanted it to backfire on Hardy, but it didn't end up happening. And him being calm, inoffensive, and fun was the reason why he was able to let Top crumble from within. I think Will's best strategy is that he knew that the jurors were watching the show and you can explain yourself in the diary room, and he created a bunch of narratives in the diary room that were advantageous to him and made the others look even worse. And he was consistent with the narrative, like throwing every comp, even if it isn't true in actuality. I will say that Will is able to learn from his mistakes and correct from them, which I cannot say for many of the house guests in the season or in Big Brother in general. Once he was not around distractions, his social game was great and he became better at strategy as he started learning as he went, with making Nicole and Hardy feel secure, telling everyone how he was honest about being a liar, planting certain seeds, and throwing the final HOH to Monica so he could send home Hardy and gain some good points with the jury. He's also just a very fun presence that people want to live with and be around. In general, though, I don't think his game of creating narratives in the diary room holds up in other seasons, since the only other season where that's an option is in BB3. In addition to that, there are also vetoes that come into play in the next season, though the veto as we know it becomes more popular in BB5, and he could have been the pawn or secondary target that goes home in later seasons. I'm basing it mainly on his BB2 game, and the potential I see of his gameplay and skills from this season, where I don't think him playing this same way would cause him to do well in most other seasons, but I'm sure he will be higher once I get to BB7. The silver placement prize of second goes to Hardy. Before rewatching the season, I very much expected him to rank third, and it's not shocking to me that he remained roughly in that spot after rewatching the season. He gave a very good first impression to people, partially because he's attractive and muscular, but comes off as well-mannered, well-spoken, more mature, and a gentlemanly person. A lot of the house guests wanted to work with him and kind of put him in this heroic light, which was a positive and a negative for him. It was a positive because it kept him safe and put him in the center of the power structure, but it was a negative because people expected him to not play with self-interest. He did have a temper, which was shown a bit towards the beginning, but it became more apparent as the season went on, and it caused for people to see him as a bully, which changed public perception of him, where he would most likely only win against Nicole, which was his final two, so it's fine, and compared to her, people saw him as more fun and genuine. Strategically, I found him to be pretty good for the most part. He definitely played up the martyr hero stuff, which Town called out from very early on, and knew how to tell people what they wanted to hear. But when he had to drop that, there were some issues, where we would see signs of this with Adam, who he wanted to go because he wanted a strong team against Chilltown, and when he turned against Kent, which was very messy as hell. He had a ride or die with Nicole, who was equally as villainous as he was, whose best chance at the finals were with one another, and was just as competitive and strategic as he was. He also made many different alliances outside of Nicole, showing that he was self-interested, which we saw with the Untouchables, bringing Will into the fold to weaponize against Top, turning on Kent after the latter's HOH itis, and insisting on it, being insistent on cutting Krista and Bunky, though it was the hard thing to do. He was picking up on the game very quickly, and those are the people that do well and can adapt. We even saw him offer a deal to Mike when he was HOH. Even during the jury questioning, he made it look like he was upset with Nicole, so Will wouldn't nullify his vote, and it actually worked, so even then he was still strategizing and figuring out a way to make his presence and influence known. At the same time, he has huge anger issues, comes off as sanctimonious and hypocritical at times, which costs his jury chances to lessen, but a part of that is due to him being ahead of his time when they played the season. It was not an expectation to turn on people and to only come off as heroic, so with that, and in addition to doing well in competitions, there weren't even physical competitions in this season, so he would be dominating even more with physical competitions, as he only won mental in this season. I could see him doing very well on seasons, with a power of veto, a quicker pace, and more modern seasons. How he turned on people was definitely sloppy, and he should have maintain his relationship with Monica more, and his anger issues is why he is not at the top. And at first place is Nicole. She is someone who has a big personality, whether you either love or hate. And a lot of the house guests hated it in the beginning, which caused her to form a poor first impression, which landed her on the block. Some people like Cardi, Autumn, and Bunky started warming up to her pretty quickly, while others like Will, Mike, and Monica either didn't warm up to her at all or it took a very long time for it to happen. It almost caused her to go home, and many people have gone home first or early due to the same things, but she stayed because she was able to recover from her social mistakes. After that, she got in a power position and had solid allies, even forming good relationships with Chilltown members like Will and Shannon, which partially caused her to play the middle. At the same time, the house thought that she was the most miserable person in the entire season, how she did not know how to have fun, and was just unpleasant to live with, which is why she ultimately did not win the jury vote. Nicole knew that in order to stay, she had to form key relationships with people and to start having meaningful conversations, which we saw when she became close to Hardy, Krista, Bunky, Kent, and to a lesser extent, Autumn early on. She quickly became a power player, with working to infiltrate Chilton from within and making her own deals and connections with people. Walt ended up groveling to Nicole so he can stay in the house. Hardy became her ride or die, and the others kissed up to her for much of the season. She knew that they had to turn on top, but she did not want to be the one to send Kent home, so she threw the HOH to Hardy and made sure that in order to have Hardy as only hers, she took out Krista and destroyed the Untouchable Alliance, who was also a front runner of the season. She made sure to have her shields in front of her and knew that she had to separate game from personal, but like Hardy, she put herself in a martyr position which pissed the house off, and she also claimed that she would go home after she gleefully sent Chilton home, but of course she didn't do that. I think Nicole's game has aged very well, and she would do well in more modern seasons. Getting into a majority alliance, dominating comms, controlling the information flow being spread in the house, always being a step ahead strategically, and all of that. In a case where there's a power of veto, and in a more fast-paced, less morally guilty house, I see her thriving more and winning in more seasons, and more recent seasons. So that is my conclusion on the BB2 gameplay TS rankings and how I feel about them, how I feel like the games would age in more recent seasons, and about their skill set solely based on the season. It'll be interesting to see how the game evolved, how people started using their strategies, and all that. And I'm definitely looking forward to watching BB3. Thank you all for supporting, and I'll be back with something soon. Bye!